Okay, hello everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Laura Perna from the University of Pennsylvania, and I have the great pleasure to serve as the moderator for this session. As you know, the title of this session is A Vision and Roadmap for Education Statistics, a report from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. In this session, we have the wonderful, give you a preview of what's coming already. In this session, we have the wonderful opportunity to learn more about the report and engage in conversation about its implications. As AERA members, we all know that the National Center for Education Statistics plays a vital role in collecting, analyzing, and disseminating statistics for all levels of education. We also know that with changes in demographics, educational delivery, and data, NCES is facing both challenges and opportunities. The consensus report that we will hear more about offers a vision for the future of NCES for the next 7 years and a reimagining of how NCES might accomplish its mission. To improve our understanding of the related issues, we are very privileged to have 5 amazing panelists, some who will be here with us in person and some people participating remotely. First, Larry Hedges. Larry is the Board of Trustees Professor of Statistics and Education and Social Policy at Northwestern University. Larry's here live. Then we have Sam Lucas, who I don't know if we can see the panelists now, but we will see him at some point, presumably, Professor of Sociology at the University of California, Berkeley. McCall Kurlander, who is here in person, Professor and Department Chair at the University of California, Davis. David Francis, who is virtual, is the Hugh Roy and Lily Krantz Cullen Distinguished University Chair at the University of Houston. And then Peggy Carr, who's the Commissioner of the National Center for Education Statistics and the Institute of Education Sciences in the U.S. Department of Education. They're all amazing people. You should, if you don't know about them, you should Google their bios. In the interest of time, I won't tell you more about their work, but they are terrific and extremely well qualified to comment on these issues. So in terms of the organization of our time together, we're going to begin with an overview of the panel's work and its recommendations. Larry was the chair of the panel, and so he will begin. And then Sam Lucas, a member of the panel, will also comment. Then we'll have observations of important issues to note from the report and some discussion of potential future directions. We'll hear from McCall first, and then from David. And then the next component will be to hear reflections on ideas and opportunities raised by the report by Peggy Carr. So with that, Larry.
Gosh, when Laura commented that I was alive, I thought that was about the best introduction I was going to get. So it got better from there. When IES decided that they wanted to have a panel to look at the vision and future of education statistics, the National Center for Education Statistics, I was happy about that, and I was only modestly less happy when I wound up agreeing to be chair of the panel. But it was a great panel to work with. And I think this report really is a product of all of the folks in the panel. So let me just give you an overview of what I plan to do today, or what Sam and I plan to do jointly, is that I'll talk briefly about a 21st century vision for the National Center for Education Statistics, and then talk about the recommendations in the report that we hope will help realize that vision. And then Sam and I will share that work, and then I'll come back at the end to talk a little bit about the roadmap, which was our idea of how one might go about implementing the suggestions that we made. So first, let me talk about a vision for the National Center for Education Statistics in the 21st century. The charge to the panel from the director of the Institute of Education Sciences was to review trends and developments in using alternative data sources, alternative to the ones that NCES was currently using, I think, to consider current and future priorities, and to create a vision and a roadmap for the next 7 years for the center. And that would include recommending a future portfolio of products and activities, suggesting changes in those in the existing programs and operations, and talking about ways to increase impact. And our focus was to be entirely on the NCES statistical programs as opposed to their assessment programs like NAEP, because there was a separate panel that was going to consider assessment. One of the things that we realized almost immediately is that there was a lot going on. The education data landscape is changing very dramatically. It's been changing for years, but the pace of that change is, if anything, accelerating. One of the factors that is part of that change is that the student populations in the US are getting more diverse, and diversity and inclusion is getting more important. If anybody doesn't know that, they haven't been paying attention in the last few years to our country. At the same time, there's an explosion of new data sources that could reasonably provide evidence about the functioning of education and about which NCES ought to be not just aware, but participating in various ways. And finally, there's a strong interest in evidence-based decision-making. This is realized in one way in the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act of 2018, but in a sense, the impetus isn't just because of this law. This law is because of the impetus. And that creates even greater demands for evidence in education. And ideally, the National Center for Education Statistics should be a key provider of that evidence. So when we began to think about our report, we decided that the way to do this best would be to just imagine what an education statistics agency would be and what it would do if it was established today. Not starting with what NCES is, but starting with what we think NCES could be. Now, this wasn't entirely a fanciful exercise, because one of the conditions we were reminded was likely to prevail for some time was that the level of resources available to the center was not going to increase dramatically, even though we agreed, I think, that I know that the level of resources that the center has is really much too modest compared to companion federal statistical agencies. They really are doing quite a lot with what they've got, which is less than they ought to have. So the vision that we articulated was one of NCES as a leader in the 21st century education data ecosystem, not as the only thing in the 21st century education data ecosystem, but as a leader in that system. And I emphasize the word system. We envision an NCES that was able to act and make decisions strategically about what it was going to do and what it was going to not do, even more importantly, perhaps. An agency that was nimble in adapting to the changes in the environment, because one of the things we were certain about, one thing we knew we could predict, was that there were going to be more changes, and perhaps changes happening faster than they have been. We think it needs to be able to provide relevant, timely, and reliable products and services, something that federal statistical agencies don't always do such a good job at. We think that in order to do this, they are going to have to create strategic partnerships with other entities in the education data ecosystem. We think they're going to insist on having a strong role in evidence building. We think that they're going to have to be constantly on the lookout for opportunities to incorporate new data from new sources that can provide the kind of analytic insights that are necessary. And I think this is a crucial thing in the future when the number of data sources is multiplying dramatically. We think that their need to expand their services in data governance and data facilitation. This is something NCES does well, and it could do better if they put more emphasis on it and expanded their role beyond what it has typically been. they're going to need to be strategically responsive to stakeholders. They are going to need to conceive of themselves as an agency that responds in a strategic way to stakeholders. They can't do everything that everybody wants, but they have to make decisions about what to do in a strategic way, which is hard. Now, that all sounds very good at an abstract level. And we were certainly mindful on the panel that if we gave a bunch of abstract recommendations, first of all, it was very unlikely that they would be interpreted in the way we intended them. And secondly, they would leave the agency with no idea how to proceed. So in our recommendations, we thought a lot about what we really meant the agency was going to have to do in order to realize the vision we had. One of the first things that we concluded, and I think we've emphasized in the report, is that there needs to be a transformative approach to change rather than marginal change. Tinkering around the edges is not enough to create the kind of changes that we're envisioning. We have embodied our recommendations and conclusions into 5 conclusions and 15 recommendations, which we'll say a little bit more about later. But we've emphasized as much as we could operational details and illustrative examples so that people reading the report could actually figure out what we were talking about. And we've used a lot of examples from other federal agencies and other agencies outside the government to help make clear what we're talking about. I should say, for those of you who want to wade into this, the recommendations in chapter 2 are probably the most fundamental and most transformative. And I would commend those to you if you really want to get deeply into this. Now, we're mindful that NCES is currently addressing some of the things we're recommending, and we're glad to see that. And we don't think we're the only ones smart enough to figure out some of the things we're suggesting. We know that NCES already figured out some of those things, and they're trying to do them. But we want to help the center push further to do the things they've already thought of doing and that are in line with our recommendations, and to take up some of the ones that they haven't yet. And we're actually optimistic, even though all of us are on the panel, we're old enough to be have been disappointed. We were also optimistic enough to think that something might be possible that would surprise us. And part of the reason is that we think conditions are better than ever to take action. There's a sense that something needs to be done in the world, and perhaps that is propitious for the moment we're in right now. We made early on, we recognized that we were suggesting NCES do a lot of new things. And one of the things we recognized was a constraint was that I've already mentioned that we weren't going to assume that the level of resources would skyrocket just because our report suggested it. So if the agency has to do a bunch of new things with the same budget and the same level of resources that it has, they're going to have to make some choices about what not to do that they've been doing. And we think the only way to do that in a cost-effective way, or in an effective way, forget the cost, is to have a strategic plan that helps discipline the trade-offs that are going to have to be made as they face what not to do that they've been doing, as well as what to do that they haven't been doing. So that's one of our first recommendations, that strategic planning is going to be highly important because it's going to be necessary to prioritize data collection and products. And this will going to be particularly important with respect to some of the particular recommendations, like our recommendation on diversity. We think it's going to be necessary to expand the data sources that are going to be used. And things like expanding stakeholder engagements and improving dissemination and usefulness have to be done in a thoughtful way that is consistent with the strategic objectives of the organization. We talk a lot in the report about leveraging external resources. The vision of NCES as the organization that collects all the data that it makes available has, I think, outlived its usefulness. I think NCES and other federal statistical agencies are increasingly going to have to leverage the data collected by others, other federal agencies, statistical agencies or not, and some non-federal agencies, and to learn from the private sector where models for the kind of thing we're suggesting have been sort of proven. They need to be strategically organized to use resources and to build the internal capabilities that they're going to need to create a culture of innovation. We're talking, we're asking for something of a culture change, and that's difficult. Now, one of the most important of the recommendations that we made shouldn't be a surprise to anybody who's been paying attention to the world in the last few years. We think that they have to embed diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in all of the work that the center does, not just about collecting, data about types of people, but throughout the data lifecycle. That starts with data content and questionnaire design. It's clear that measurement of any social construct has different meanings, different interpretations for different groups. And it's crucial that a statistical agency understands something about that before they decide what data to collect and how to process it. Things like outcomes and educational processes, equity, access to education, opportunity to learn have different interpretations for different people, and that has to be front and center part of how NCES thinks about the data that they collect. There are ethical issues about benefits and reciprocation to respondents that have to be paid attention to with diversity and equity in mind. Similarly, things like imputation and machine learning and algorithms that are used in the data collection process or the data presentation process aren't necessarily neutral, simply technical problems. They pose the danger of reinforcing the very historical assumptions that we're proposing be re-examined in the effort to embed diversity, equity, and inclusion in the operations of the center. And it has to be part of products and dissemination as well. It also has to be, something that is deeply embedded in the organization, not just in the staff, but in working with stakeholders, in working with the contractors and contracts and other external researchers or people like visiting fellows that may also be a part of the NCES world. Now, at this point, I'm going to attempt one of those very difficult technological feats, which is to trade off with Sam Lucas, who was one of my colleagues on the panel, and he's going to take over from now. But I'm not quite sure how we do this.
Yes.
Does
Hello?
any of those fellows sitting at the table know how we do this?
Can you hear me?
I can move the slides then for Sam.
Yes. So the next slide. Okay. So thank you, Larry. So the work, as Larry indicated, the work that the work of the panel recognized that this was an uncommon opportunity with this renewed emphasis on evidence-based decision-making. And as he said, it's not just that there's an evidence act, it's that the social transformations that are behind the Evidence Act are making it a wonderful opportunity for NCES to respond and step up to fill that void. It's hard to set priorities in a vacuum, and so part of our work was pointing to the necessity of NCES collaborating within the education department. We talked a great deal about the different roles that these different actors need to play to bring about the strongest, most effective NCES that is possible. That also entails building stronger partnerships with other entities in the organization, and in that process, collaboratively decide what priorities there are. And also collaborating with data holding agencies and organizations, which was one of our recommendations. That's valuable in lots of ways, increasing the power of the data that exists. It also maximizes the return on previous investments, and in a cost-constrained environment, while we weren't singly focusing on the financial aspect of it, it is true that if you can leverage other data holding agencies and organizations, the money will go further. And that also plays a role in supporting state and local education agencies who are doing a job of data collection on their own and making those connections stronger. So I guess the next slide. So part of that is also going to be thinking creatively about existing data sources and new data sources. So one of the recommendations points to using and developing new data sources and data linkage, especially administrative data. We noted that there's this just this massive set of data out there for the taking, and as many schools and districts put their data online for their publics to access and even engage in a lot of their management through that process for course taking and so forth. Those are resources that are there to be harvested, and there are many other kinds of connections that need to be made to increase to draw on those new sources of data and therefore increase NCES's capabilities, both of using that data and making it available for others. A lot of this is also going to entail bridging studies and studies to assess the quality of the data that can be collected with these new sources and how fit it is for various uses. And part of that's going to necessitate methodological research to make sure that the data quality remains high. And at the same time, I actually have a slide, yes. I just want to point out, we talked about modernizing the consent language and permitting secondary uses and privacy protected linkage. Basically, at the same time as they're pursuing these, collecting these data from new sources, the existing data collection strategies remain important, but they need to be modified a bit so that we can facilitate the use through consent language and commitments that protect privacy on the one hand, continue to protect privacy, but allow possibly unanticipated secondary uses. So the data doesn't become unusable because of commitments that were made about privacy. So now I guess the next slide. So we were working aware that NCES can't be all things to all stakeholders and that there are always limited resources and that those are just givens. So the report offers one example approach of thinking through the set of data collection activities and the kind of data collected to prioritize. Prioritizing topics that are most relevant to understanding contemporary education and discontinuing certain activities. Now, some of those activities and some of those data collection goals are mandated by Congress. And new mandates are often enacted, but old ones are rarely removed. So what we observed is that sometimes there's a mandated data collection, but there's been a mushrooming of other data around it. And so the question we encourage NCES to ask is how much data needs to be collected to meet each mandate at the same time as they're thinking strategically about what data to collect to meet the mandate and to meet other policy needs for policy information. Next slide. And we went through this process, but we were doing so with incomplete information, but just to demonstrate the process that we had in mind. And when we did that, certain priorities rose to the top. The equity and access issues, as you might have imagined, given that it's become one of our key recommendations, but also the need for early childhood education data to be collected at a more intense level, career and technical education, adult education. These are all areas where there's been more intensification of the work and more people falling into those categories, while they may not have, maybe the data collection hasn't kept pace. And the same thing about administrative infrastructure of education, getting more data and more, making sure that that doesn't get lost in the shuffle. And the last thing I'll say on this slide is that facilitating cross-state and international comparisons, which NCS is perfectly positioned to do, both outward facing toward other countries, but also helping cross-state connections, because it is a federal agency and therefore is well positioned to do that. And the next slide is that NCS doesn't need to do this alone. We encourage them to explore and establish, look at the different models for basically an advisory group of external review body of some kind, decide what kind of structure will make sense for them, and then draw on that body for help with innovating and continuous improvement to keep the methods effective as knowledge grows, to help maintain their accountability, to help them when there's something that they are facing a difficult decision, since the body will be aware enough of the path that they've trod so far, they might be well positioned to help them figure out the next steps. We were not necessarily calling for a federal advisory committee of some kind, but some advisory body that would be of assistance, and also supplemented by a pool of ad hoc consultants that would be brought in on a case-by-case basis as need arose. And then the next slide is about engaging researchers. And that's, again, partnering with researchers, external researchers, for evidence building. Part of that is, there's this massive amount of data, very powerful data, locked up in restricted forms. And there is a process for getting access to that. We're hoping that that will be facilitated and expanded. We also think that you can match the internal staff with highly qualified external researchers for important collaborative and synergistic activities to improve the work of the center and to keep the center aware of what's going on outside of the center. So we see this partnering as key to expanding both the reach and the impact of the center. And it also has a powerful diversity, equity, and inclusion possibility as well. And then the next slide is engaging other external resources. So the important point is to not just outsource activities, but to bring a lot of, make sure that that institutional knowledge comes in-house as well. Certainly contractors can be very helpful, but over-reliance on contractors and high turnover can endanger NCS's ability to retain that institutional knowledge and therefore profit by it down the line. So we're not suggesting that contractors are necessarily a problem, but it needs to be managed in the sense that all of these things need to be managed to realize the vision that we are calling for NCS to analyze and construct. And now I think I can hand it back to Larry.
Thank you, Sam. So we decided to try and, since we have asked a lot of the center and IES, and we decided it would be useful, perhaps, to draw out a roadmap of what we think could feasibly be done to get where we hope that they will get over the next 5 years or so. And this roadmap may or may not help you understand what we had in mind, but I'll at least tell you what we thought it might depict. And what we thought it might depict was that immediately the Secretary of Education and the Director of IES and the NCES Commissioner should collaborate to ensure that NCES is an independent and statistical agency in developing and producing and disseminating its statistics. That's its mission. That they should take actions to enable the NCES commissioner to most effectively fulfill the responsibilities of the statistical official under the Evidence Act. Within 1 year of the report, we think it's reasonable for NCES to have developed a strategic plan, and they should be able, based on that strategic plan, to begin reviewing and prioritizing its data acquisition activities and collaborating with other data holding agencies within the government and perhaps even outside, and to begin planning for the activities in the coming years. Within a year after the strategic plan has been developed, we think NCES should have developed action plans that will allow the agency to work on diversity and awareness and equity issues and to expand their data acquisition strategies. That, and without going through all the rest of this, the point is that we phased in some particular activities that we think can be done in specified periods of time that will help the agency accomplish what we are calling for in this report. We've been pleased so far with the response it's gotten, and I am now going to end my and Sam's part of this presentation and just commend anybody who really wants to look at it to go and have a look at the full report, which is downloadable from the website that's indicated here. And there's a shameless plug for other Committee on National Statistics reports on the slide as well. And some of those are actually worth reading as well. So I'm going to stop and let Laura tell me what happens next.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you for those presentations. And now we'll hear from McCall. You can stay there if you want.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Can you hear me now? Okay. Oh, now you can hear me. Okay, thanks. All right, well, thank you for inviting me to offer some reflections and comments on this really impressive, I think it's 200 pages or so that I've now viewed a couple times, but really super subs. I'm not gonna like disagree with any of the conclusions, but I think I was asked to just kind of offer some reflections. And I'll mostly pertain, most of my reflections will pertain to my role as a researcher, my comparative advantage here, and for other researchers given this conference. But I will say that as a department chair for the last several years, I really appreciated all the tactical and highly useful suggestions on strengthening organizational capacity for NCS and in terms of personnel and resources that the report also offers, and which I suspect will maybe be even more useful to NCS and related agencies. So I want to offer three specific areas of reflection that try to embed the key themes of the report, and in a particular thread around diversity, equity, and inclusion, which comes through. So the first is NCS as a data facilitator. So NCS could play a stronger facilitation role, building capacity to streamline data linkages, preparing and coordinating data sources, and simplifying processes for greater data access for more researchers. All stuff that both Sam and Larry have already said. So again, the evidence just is going to be sort of endorsing, fine-tuning some of what's already been said. The Evidence Act, which as the report details, effectively expanded NCS's mission by giving the agency new authorities and duties for evidence building, and acting on these duties is, I think, particularly critical in the area of DIA. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. So there's been intense expansion of novel data sources as already been articulated, and possibilities for linking, but I believe data accessibility has not kept up with those. So I really particularly endorse recommendation 2-5, which is that NCS should continually explore alternative data sources for potential use in data and statistical products, and conduct studies, particularly of the quality and the fit for use of these linkages and from different sources. Also, I believe NCS should lead an effort of data integration across entities and has been somewhat behind by comparison to other agencies. And so in particular, I'm thinking of promoting greater access to enhance innovation through engaging diversity of researchers, training programs, NCS staff. And now I'm sort of stepping back and suggesting, as I chair the NAE Spencer Dissertation Fellowship. And this is where, when you look at sort of pre-doc trainings and other programs, you really see the diversity of quality of training and access to data across our states, or across the nation's educational institutions and people pursuing PhDs in education related disciplines. And so I think NCS has done historically more training. I'm now thinking like, 20 years ago, and there's more training on data sources and others. I think most of what we're seeing, that investment is now in IES pre-doc programs and postdoc programs. And I think more can be done at other levels of the PhD pipeline. Let's see. So again, I think I mentioned this. I think this has not been the case as much with labor market data or social service data, but also promoting more opportunities in related fields. I think, let me see if I think there are other nice examples that aren't through NCS data where we see this. For example, the SEDA data, the CETA data, Stanford Education Data Analysis data, archive data. I think that's what A stands for, is that right? Yeah. Or the cost analysis that IS has been promoting and investing in for training and cost analysis work as part of the IES grants program that has been made more widely available to researchers to include. So I think we have examples of related at a smaller scale that could be enhanced here. The second theme is NCS's data curator. The report, and as we just heard, just makes a really compelling set of recommendations around DEI and understanding the increasing diversity of learners and of educational environments. I think this, as Sam and Larry have already said, requires important investments in developing new constructs and measures to truly be at the forefront of these changes. And here I'll just add that I think language matters and history matters. And there are many education research and policy settings that and I know others in the room, find ourselves in with a lot of disagreement and challenges to existing constructs and terms. I think we need to embrace these discussions, and I think NCS can play a role in curating knowledge about what we measure and how, with respect to the many of the characteristics the report offers: gender, sex identity, race, ethnicity, categories, disabilities, socioeconomic constructs, and many others that are potentially trickier about schooling environments. A variety of schooling environments. And I think the report suggests that these really matter: administrative structures, finance, organizational dimensions. So I think that there's a role to play there, again, in connection with DI. By the way, I think there's mention of international and comparative opportunities, but not as much. So I think that's another place where we could learn from other culture societies. And then finally, NCS's chief data guide for the states. And here I will say, for the last decade, I've really invested heavily in California's data system. And I know you had some Californians on your panel. And so we've all been through this cradle to career development. California has historically been very behind other states in integrating data. And I've had to do it as a researcher by brute force myself. See my colleague there from the Department of Ed, so she knows. But if we build this thing that we are intending to, and which is now in the budget, it will be state of the art and pretty impressive in terms of its ability to also play an important role for public use of data. So I think we have lots to learn from the state. So, but in particular, I think NCS can play a role here. And especially in this kind of post-pandemic recovery period. So endorsing recommendation 4.4 that NCS should strengthen state capacity to link data across systems, but really to adopt shared data standards and actionable information to state and local LEAs to improve student learning outcomes. And so while I think the statewide longitudinal data system grant programs can help, I think it actually barely brushes the surface in meeting this goal personally. I think it can play a bigger role in assembling and guiding state agencies and adopting these shared data standards and quality, and in leading actionable information. And this includes, I would love to have added to your 100+ kind of content areas that you all explored. I'm sure these came up. These are broad areas of early childhood education, which at least in our state, which is incredible expansion of early childhood programs as a state policy, and in other states, post-secondary pathways and labor markets, socio-emotional learning measures, achievement growth, been a tricky one for our accountability system for a long time. And then of course, teaching settings, mediums, online, hybrid, all of which intersect with equity, questions of access, and opportunities to learn through the education life course. So my final thoughts, that the report ends with this reminder that this opportunity should not be lost. I couldn't agree more. This enormous amount of thinking and just amazing people part of this panel that went into this report and into the idea of a roadmap for education statistics. And so I encourage those who are charged with moving what again, I might read as some aspirational recommendations to realization, and to develop a sense of what would a recommendation like this look like, which I think has already been done here today. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Now we'll hear from David Francis.
Yeah. So can you all hear me?
Yes.
So good afternoon, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I regret that I had to leave San Diego early, as I would have much preferred to be there with you. In every dad's life, there comes a time when he should decline his daughter's invitations to play tennis, and for me that time was about a month and a half ago. But because I failed in that test, I'm now hobbling around on crutches after spending Thursday and Friday limping around AERA on a gimpy but otherwise functioning knee. So I'd like to start by congratulating Peggy Carr, the director of NCES, for her award for public service from AERA. This significant accomplishment signifies that the leadership at NCES is outstanding. And it's not surprising to me that Peggy and the IES director, Mark Schneider, requested this review of NCES as IES considers its future directions. It's important to recognize the leadership of Mark and Peggy in this effort to ask for independent examination of the first 20 years of IES, and to contemplate what NCES needs to do to advance education statistics over the next 7 years. It's one of several National Academies reviews requested by IES, and I think that speaks volumes about the IES leadership. I would also like to start by thanking the committee, the reviewers, and the National Academies staffers, especially the study director, Melissa Chu, and of course, Larry Hedges as the committee chair, for the comprehensive and thoughtful report that they've assembled. It's really a daunting task to find something meaningful to say regarding a report that reflects the consensus opinion of so many of our nation's leading experts in statistics and education. And indeed, my comments are not critiques of the recommendations or conclusions, but some cautions about implementation. I hold the dubious distinction of being the last chairman of the Advisory Council on Education Statistics, the group that served as an outside advisory panel to NCES prior to the Education Sciences Reform Act. I applaud the committee's recommendation to identify an external advisory group to NCES, especially following my experiences being nominated by 2 presidents, appointed by 1 president, and then summarily dismissed by a 3rd president from the National Board of Education Sciences prior to ever having attended a single meeting of the National Board. The politicization of the National Board of Education Sciences over the last 8 years leaves me suspicious that NCES can get the kind of independent, nonpartisan guidance that it needs from the current advisory structure. It's easy for statistics to become politicized in education, and NCES's credibility as a statistical agency depends on their ability to remain above that fray, and I sincerely hope that they can successfully navigate the road ahead. I found the breadth of the NCES scope of work really actually breathtaking. I think we all know about the major programs and reports, the Common Core of Data, the assessment programs like NAEP, TIMSS, and PISA, the longitudinal surveys and the Condition on Education, and their efforts to help states build longitudinal data systems, which have fostered so much good research within states and across states, and have helped to foster the creation of other resources like the Stanford Data Archive and the College Scorecard, which creates linkages between education and economic outcomes for students. But I learned in the report of other NCS work like the Education Demographic and Geographic Estimates program that combines extant data collections to create new resources for spatial analysis of education data, which creates a whole new window on the study of educational context. I was equally impressed by the amount of work that the committee did. These are labors of love because, as you know, the work is voluntary. I can only hope that the 18 closed meetings were not meetings of the whole committee. If not, the academies may have a hard time recruiting people for Larry's next committee. That's just a lot of work, Larry. Considering the broad portfolio of products, tools, reports, and data sources that the NCES routinely produces, made me wonder about how well versed the staff at the regional educational labs are about these valuable resources and the extent to which they actually put them to work in serving LEAs and SEAs. I wondered the same about the contractors who work with the National Center for Education Evaluation. And I'm sure that there's some awareness, but I wondered if a concerted effort to educate these potential super users of NCES products and data sources might actually be beneficial to NCES. The report draws attention to recent efforts and the desire for evidence-based policy decisions and the use of data to evaluate policies to motivate future work of NCES. I don't know anyone who would disagree with this conclusion and recommendation. But I also have to caution that policy is a really blunt instrument for change, and observational data are weak for the development of generalizable causal inference. And I'm not suggesting or implying that anything in the report suggests otherwise, but it's just important to remember that the policy lever is a blunt one, and developing an action plan for policy based on observational data requires caution and careful evaluation, and it can be a basis for experimentation through phased rollout of policies. And it would be nice to actually draw that connection. I didn't see that connection made explicitly in the report, at least not as best as I could tell. And I think it's important that NCES considers the path that it's going to follow from study to policy in its strategic planning. I applaud the committee's decision not to engage in trying to prioritize and or deprioritize NCES's current and future data collections, but made some recommendations about how such a broader deliberative process might be undertaken. I thought it was a really great process they went through. However, I would add that in making these determinations, groups must also now consider the potential relevance or use of the data by other agencies or groups. So we have to go beyond the relevance of the data to ED and consider as well the relevance of ED data to other potential agencies and groups. There are numerous examples in the report of how NCES data is being merged with data collected by other agencies to bring about new data sources that are leading to new knowledge and insights. So the potential utility of data beyond its original purpose and constituents adds significantly to an already difficult and complex task of prioritizing or deprioritizing current data collections. And I wish NCES luck in this difficult endeavor. A key focus of the report is on NCS's role in advancing issues related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. To make a focus of DEI work, the agency has to come to firm understanding and operationalization of these issues and all of the ways in which they must operationalize these constructs. I think that's what McCall was actually saying, and I think it's also exactly what Larry was saying about thinking about constructs. But I want to simplify it just a little bit because presently most NCES reports disaggregate data along a single dimension and are not positioned to disaggregate data along multiple dimensions simultaneously. And this practice needs to change because children are not interchangeable. There is tremendous heterogeneity within any and all demographic subgroups. And if we are to design NCES reports to address DEIA, we really need surveys to be designed to answer questions that are posed more precisely than comparisons of racial/ethnic groups, English learners versus not English learners, etc. This caution stems from my concern to understand better how factors work in concert with one another, things like racial groups and economic disparity. How do those things combine? Things like English learners and economic disparity. How do those combine? That relate to these intersections relate to large segments of the country, but they're currently missing in many NCES reports, if not all. With that said, the discussion about diversity and how to improve NCES's process to ensure equity is really nicely thought out and presented in the report in Chapter 2. And if you don't read anything else in the report, reading Chapter 2 is absolutely essential reading, although I think the whole report is worth reading. The committee recommends that NCES prioritize questions of equity and access, and I don't disagree with this priority at all, but it is easy to say and very hard to do. There is tremendous heterogeneity in school contexts across the U.S. As part of our IES-funded English Learner Center, we have recently begun looking at science and mathematics course taking among English learners and non-English learners in middle school and high school. The complex array of courses that are available to students, the diverse requirements associated with courses, cross-disciplinary prerequisites such as math requirements for science course taking, the fact that districts have discretion in adopting recommended prerequisites and making them required prerequisites are just some of the features of this landscape that influence course taking and course sequencing, which we all know is about opportunity to learn. So as the committee states, the types of data that are needed depend on the question. But I think it's also important to realize that some questions may be difficult to answer well via national surveys, and NCES should be empowered to say so when that's the case. I have several other minor comments, but I'll leave those for another day. Again, I really want to compliment the committee, the chair, Drs. Carr and Schneider for their vision and roadmap for education statistics. I'm optimistic that NCES will play an even more significant role in the future of education in the U.S. than the already substantial role that it plays today. I, for one, think the future is bright, and I have confidence in the current leadership to seize the opportunity that they've created for the center. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. And now we're going to hear from Peggy Carr with assistance with doing the slides in person here. So technology is very interesting how it's all coming together. So thank you.
Well, thank you. As the slides find their way up, I want to first thank on behalf of the National Center for Education Statistics, this very distinguished panel and the Academies for the hard work that they have done, the dedication and intellectual generosity in the production of this high quality report. And I am struck by the panel today as well. You know, I knew that the panel members for decades, but I am struck by every time I listen to them talk about this report, how rich it is and so much to do. And the comments that we've heard today from the commentators, you did a very thorough job as well in digesting what is in this report. And it just reminds me that there's just so much to do. So thank you, the National Academies. Thank you, the panel, this distinguished panels, and those, David, Francis, and others who have taken the time to go through this report and talk to us today. It is a comprehensive and detailed report, I would say, on the status and the future opportunities of the center, informed by evidence and thoughtful deliberation. And I've read the report more than once with notes all through it. And I can say the virtues of thoughtfulness and deliberation is evident on every single page. There is so much work to be done, but there's so much thought that has gone into what needs to happen. It has been more than 3 decades since the National Academy's landmark report, creating a Center for Education Statistics, a time for action. Remember, it was back in 1986. It initiated, and from my perspective, NCS's modernization, and it ushered in a new level of professionalism and productivity. I was actually there and I saw the change and the revolutionary change that took place amongst the people who were working there, and all the thoughts that went into our standards and how we developed as an organization. Now, this report is an ambitious successor to that substance and the spirit that will guide the center through its next phase and its next milestones. It is, in fact, indeed time. The panel took a bold position and had bold recommendations for NCS. They were astute and incisive in thinking about what we should be doing to increase mission impact. It's a term that I know is used throughout the report again and again, and I've been thinking about what that means, mission impact. And it is encouraging us, if we want to remain a leader and be an innovator in education, data, ecosystem of not just the United States, but also across the world, then we need to think again. We need to start anew. There are 5 conclusions and 15 recommendations, as you've heard. I was invigorated and inspired by all of them. Some of them will be more challenging to pursue and implement than others. But what I was appreciative of is that the vision, the bold vision, the very thoughtful vision that we heard about today and is throughout this report, is that the thinking about what NCS should do to fulfill its mission was not constrained by those challenges. And I think that's important. I picked up on 3 important themes throughout the report that I want to comment on: partnerships, innovation. And, I had in my notes to say equity, but I think I've learned now that I need to revise my thinking about this term as just a single term to represent many, many activities that need to take place to ensure diversity, inclusion, and access, DEIA. I will revise my vernacular in that way. I was enthusiastic about these terms also because they represent the 3 pillars that I had envisioned as the commissioner, prior to even seeing the report, for the future of NCS in the 21st century. Partnerships are important, and I plan to build more effective partnerships than the ones NCS currently has, because quite frankly, they're too program specific, they're often siloed, and quite frankly, not sufficiently integrated. Innovations. We are living in a data revolution, if you hadn't noticed. AI, data science, and the ubiquitous nature of technology and teaching and learning and everyday life makes it clear that innovation must be an imperative for the NCS of tomorrow. I heard that loud and clear, and I was already thinking in that way. But this report was very, very clear, as Larry pointed out, with exemplars and examples and exhibits about what exactly they meant. They operationalized their thinking, and for that, I'm very grateful. And equity, or DEIA, as I now should be calling it, underpins it all. There are no real understandings of the condition of education in this country, from my perspective, without the full integration of all of these indicators into every aspect of NCES, everything that we do, our designs, our methods, our analysis, our reporting, and our dissemination of products and activities. I know this to be true. As the panel stated in the report, this is an opportunity that should not be lost. And I have to say, I could not agree more. In the interest of time, I want to take a few more minutes and speak about some of the recommendations. There are a lot, so I can't talk about all of them, but there are some that I think are really, really key, and I want to point out my thinking and what I think that they mean for us. This recommendation encourages NCS to create a bold strategic plan. And the report says several times, and implement it with discipline. Report does a good thing about repeating what it wants us to hear over and over again. And it says that several times, implement it with discipline. So that's been key to me. The key objectives of this recommendation was to incentivize innovation, a culture of innovation. I wrote that down today. I read it in the report and I wrote it down today again, and to create partnerships. But partnerships, I think, in a different way. We've been thinking about them in the past. Partnerships that really feed back into the center's mandate to produce relevant, timely, and reliable statistics. We have to do more than just give lip service to this recommendation. While it's true that NCS has conducted some strategic planning, you heard our colleagues here on the panel say that today, I'm here to admit that these activities have not always been consistent. They have not always been well integrated across the center, and they have been characterized by stops and starts and starts and stops. I know, because I've been here 30 years looking at it. This has partly been because we've always had to stop and pivot to a new commissioner every 3 years, and quite frankly, sometimes less than every 3 years. But fortunately, this time, this challenge cannot be used as an excuse, because the first time, I believe since Emerson Elliott, I, as the commissioner, will be available for the entire 6-year term to implement such strategic planning. So, in any event, a proactive strategic plan is long overdue. We need to think big. The report is challenging us to think big, and I agree wholeheartedly. And to the extent that I can, I will not be encumbered by these challenges. The payoff for being a leading statistical agency will be well worth the risk. The report underscores well-established principles and directives that state that federal statistical agencies must be independent from undue external influences in developing, producing, and disseminating statistics. These are OMB Statistical Policy Directives 1 and 4, to be precise, and we all know them very well, and we are familiar with them. And what I appreciate most about this recommendation and bringing that to the surface in this report is that it embraces the reality that NCS needs to support and backing of its parent organization. We can't do this without IES behind us, supporting us. And we can't do it without the U.S. Department of Education to help ensure that we can operate with ease under these principles and directives. It will take us all. There is a data revolution going on today in the whole world. I serve as vice chair of the PISA governing board, and many of my staffs serve on the international boards or some of the other large-scale international assessments such as PIAC and TIMS, and we're all singing the same song. The world is singing the same song. Data revolution is upon us, and it's exciting. And it's an exciting time for evidence-based decision-making for the federal government here in the United States. The Evidence Act places statistical agencies like NCS at the heart of it all, especially Title III with the standard application process. If you haven't read that part of the Evidence Act, go and do yourself a service and read that. The Act directs all departments to make government data open by default. I'll just say that again because it's is a very, very strong statement from where we've been with CPSI data. Open by default and share that data. But I heard something else today in the description of Larry and Sam that I didn't hear before the first time they talked to us about the importance of the Evidence Act. The Evidence Act is a reflection of what is happening in the world, the social change, the focus, the need to know based on evidence. It is a reflection of that change, of what is happening, it is a result of. And I don't think I read the report again multiple times. I don't think I got that until today. Moreover, I like this recommendation, going back to the recommendation, because it uplifts and it celebrates the expanded role of the commissioner as the chief statistical official for the department, who is directed to work closely and collaboratively with senior officials elsewhere in the department to advance the use of scientifically rigorous evidence. I like that. Thank you for making that a point. Also, again, as I mentioned earlier, it pushes all of the internal parties together. The CDO, the chief data officer, the EO, the education, the evaluation officer, IES, the U.S. Department of Ed, it pushes us all together towards data. These next recommendations on new data sources encourages NCS to experiment with 3 key sources of data: surveys, administrative records, and we have a lot of that. But we haven't done very much with new and emerging sources. That's that 3rd key source that the report talks about. And I went back and I looked at it again today to make sure I understand exactly what you were suggesting. And there's a variety there. There's an explosion. And so I want you to know that we are accepting this challenge. I think is a worthy challenge. These recommendations also embrace testing and adaptation of new data science methods for harnessing alternative data. NCS is in total support, especially given the work that we've already done in this area. And I think the example of the digital process data out of NAEP would be a really good way to exemplify my point, but also the new data science unit that's being set up by IES. Impact through partnerships. Through activities such as the NCS National Forum of States and large LEAs and the NAEP state coordinators and NCS teacher and principal panels and the numerous, and I mean numerous technical panels that advise and support the administrative division of NCS, the center has seen the power of mission impact through partnerships. There's that term again, mission impact. Consistent with the suggestion of this recommendation, for example, NCS is considering setting up an NCS state and LEA team of coordinators to serve as liaisons for data collections across the entire center. But what we had not considered, and David mentioned it in his comments as well, is I believe this is a testament to the big thinking theme of this report. It's the idea to set up a center-wide, all of NCES. It's not unlike other federal statistical agencies in the center and in the system. I have to admit, I don't think I knew that until I read your report. And finally, the beauty of this recommendation, recommendations around internal structure and operation, is that you're asking us, as I heard it, to look behind the curtain and focus on what must happen internally to NCES to enact the bold vision that you've laid out for us. You're asking us to get our own house in order. This particular set of recommendations focuses on preserving historical knowledge, acquiring cutting edge knowledge, and reassessing the entire organizational structure of NCS. Now, I have to admit, this will be one of the biggest challenges set forth by this study. It's only been done twice that I remember. Jack Buckley did it and Emerson Elliott did it years ago, but it hasn't really been done since. But I'm going to think about it. So all of these NASM recommendations, and I have to say, the NCS responses to them will undoubtedly be necessary for achieving the bold vision of the study. But I want to make it clear from my perspective that it's only together will they be sufficient enough to achieve the goals of this study. So I've already corralled my staff. We are going through this report line by line. They're in teams. We're unpacking it. I want you to know that I even know the page of your roadmap, page 94, and we're taking it very seriously. Again, I thank you. I want you to know that I am committed to the vision and the roadmap that you've laid out here for us. And you've entrusted us with this valuable resource for our country. This study is a brighter vision for NCES than before we received it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Carr. Really wonderful to have the opportunity to hear your vision, your reactions to the report and the recommendations, and your commitment to addressing the challenges and really taking on so much in this ambitious report. So we have about 15 minutes for questions. If folks wanted to approach the mic and we welcome questions. Maybe I'll start and really give an opportunity to Larry and Sam to respond. You know, we heard there were certainly many issues that we could talk about at this point. You know, one that I'm curious about is the recommendations and the reflections that you heard about the DEIA. And so reflections on what folks, David and McCall and Commissioner Carr talked about in terms of advancing that work. I'm also curious if there were, you know, this is a consensus report, were there issues around DEIA that you talked about that didn't make it into the report for one reason or another? You could just talk us through a little bit, because I think, you know, this is a forward-thinking report, but there's a lot of complexity here in this category in particular. So.
Well, I can tell you what I think, but then I hope Sam will also tell us what his perspective was. You know, my sense is that the committee was to a person was on board with the central importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility as being central to what needed to happen in the reshaping of the National Center for Education Statistics. I think the kind of debate we had was, should this be the first or the second recommendation, rather than did people take exception to the idea? Because again, I think it's part of why this report is happening at a time when it's a special time which may create possibilities for change that might not happen at another time. You know, we've been through years of turmoil in the country with a recognition that what we've been doing in this area is just not enough. And it's not enough qualitatively, not quantitatively. So I think the committee was pretty much to a person on board with that idea. And I don't see that there was no real debate about that I can recall. Now, Sam may have a different perspective, but that was mine.
Yeah, so I'm wondering can we show the folks who are participating remotely, can we show them on the screen? maybe make them bigger than us. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. I'd like to see you bigger than you are right now. You're kind of a tiny square, but while we work on that, you can go ahead.
Sure, he was a full-size person.
Yeah.
Well, I can simply say that I concur with what Larry said. I think I also agree that you know, as David said, that people are they're in multiple dimensions at the same time. But we didn't, first, I would just say two things. First, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is on different people being embedded in different dimensions on different categorical schemes. We have no idea what those categorical schemes, as theory and continued social development occurs, are going to be in 5 years, right? Those things are actively changing. So we did not identify this as you need to include group X, or something like that. We are trying to say there needs to be sensitivity and an openness to the unfolding nature of categories and an inclusion with people from all places. And the reason for that, or there's lots of reasons, but two good reasons are to capture what's going on the ground. We need to have access to the full range of where people are located. And the way you're going to get that is to have in-house sensitivity to that range. So that means every element of the process, what questions to ask, what kind of data would you collect, what would you measure? If you're going to collect a particular phenomenon, how would you measure it? How will you make it accessible to people so they can use it? And on and on. Those decisions need to be made in the context of taking diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility as a foundational element of the center. And I think that, basically this was, I don't recall any element of what I just said as being rejected or something that's sort of left on the cutting room floor. I thought people were that was a quick consensus, if I remember correctly.
Great, thank you. So were there some issues, an issue that you could share that was left on the cutting room floor?
We're not supposed to be telling you about the deliberative process of the panel. It's supposed to, what happens in the National Academies is supposed to stay in the National Academies, to paraphrase a travel brochure.
Okay, that's fine. Well, so reactions to comments that you heard from.
Well, I can say I was gratified because I know Dr. Carr well enough to know that if she didn't like something, she would say so, and probably have a very good reason for feeling that way. And so I was glad to be, was gratified by her reaction and the reaction of the two reactors here. Mm-hmm. Well, one here and one not here. I think no report can do everything. And I think, both of you raised some sort of sensible things that we'd had you on the panel, we might have done a little better. Sam, do you have reactions to the?
No, it's just with yours, but I don't want to say it again because other people want to let them in too.
People in the room, maybe, I don't know if there are any questions, but talked about in different types of ways is around, leveraging the data sets. And I'll call you.
Is that NCES has a lot of experience, a lot of expertise in developing data standards and and doing that cooperatively, not imposing data standards on people, but developing data standards jointly with the providers of data. I mean, the Common Core is kind of an example of that. But there are many other examples. And often one of the roles that we thought they could play that it draws on one of their strengths, is helping organizations that in principle would like to share data, but don't have common standards for that data to make it, to develop them, to make it possible for data to be shared. And that is kind of a prerequisite for some kinds of data sharing. The other, another thing that we know is complex, but is possible, especially with the Evidence Act, which changes the set of presumptions about whether data can be shared across federal agencies. I mean, it makes the presumption that things will be shared unless there's an awfully good reason not to share them. Right. And that really changes the landscape for an agency trying to promote data linkage. And we just wanted to encourage NCES to continue to play an active role in trying to get more out of their data, help other people get more out of the data that they have by pursuing linkages. And I think we mentioned, and this is complicated in a lot of ways. One of the ways it's complicated is that sometimes you write the conditions on which you collect the data based on the use that you happen to think you're going to put the data to. And one of the relatively simple things that we thought NCES could do and get a lot more mileage out of any data they collect in the future is to create a permission structure that allows that data to be used for other things, because it's often impossible to go back and ask for permission to use data for another purpose after it's already been collected. So we think there are a bunch of things like that will if pursued diligently, could really enhance the kinds of data that are available. I guess I should mention that there are examples in the report of data linkages that are carried out entirely outside of government that seem to be accomplishing very useful things. And that can be models of how, when there's a really important need, it can be filled. And also it can be filled in part by partners that are outside the federal government, but perhaps with the technical and other kinds of expertise of NCES, those things could happen easier, better, quicker, and be available to more people. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, helpful. McCall, do you want to jump in?
I mean, the only thing I would add is just, I actually think this, as I've noticed from, IES grants I've done in the last, I don't know, decade and a half, the requirements, I think that's one place, the connection with NCS and data collection through IES grants, where we're seeing greater kind of accountability on researchers to provide the types of transparency for this that could be strengthened. But I think it's building on that. And I particularly think it's important right now as there's new efforts to understand recovery dollars and how they're being spent and what we can learn from what's happening in other states. But so that's just, I think there's some like foundational spaces that could just be built upon with researchers who are working with non-NCS based data sets to integrate.
And you mentioned the rest of IES.
Right.
One of the things that's in the report that we haven't really touched on is the idea that the rest of IES has relevant expertise for NCES and vice versa. And it would be a good thing if there was more communication, interchange, and collaboration within IES and the other centers. And I don't think that's, isn't happening as much as we'd like it to be because of any, evil intent on anybody's part. I just think it hasn't been people haven't been thinking as creatively about the possibilities as we would like to encourage them to do.
Well, I think people often look for the solution that can solve the immediate problem and not necessarily the long-term solution that might solve many problems, and the collaboration can solve long-term problems. But getting the job done yourself can solve the problem more immediately. So that usually people are want to get the job done, and so that's where the focus is. One of the things I wanted to say about linkages is that it's not talked about in the report is making sure that NCES is maximizing its linkages across its own reports and other reports within the department, because it's one thing to try to link to other reports and other agencies, but also just making sure that all of your own data collections can be interconnected as maximally as possible is I think a really important thing. And I had one comment I wanted to make about the DEIA discussion. I had my hand up, but I guess you guys weren't able to see it. So nothing that I was trying to say was meant to be critical of anything that's actually in the report. I think that report does a really outstanding job of talking about these issues and delineating them. My comment was really a cautionary note to the department about the importance of being very thoughtful in moving forward on this, because you can do it badly or you can do it well. And to do it well, you really have to think about the questions that you're trying to ask and answer in each particular report, because if you don't, you'll end up, I think, with just a mess on your hands. And so thinking about what it is that you're really trying to accomplish with each particular report in terms of DEIA is really, really important in order to get the best possible answers. Thanks.
Great, really helpful, and apologize for not seeing your hand, David. So along those lines, I only see you on the screen, so I want to give an opportunity for Sam or Peggy. Would you like to, we're just about at time, but want to give everyone a chance for a final word. You
can't put the browser in gallery view so you can see everybody?
Well, while you're doing that, I'm going to comment on the pledges. That's one of those low-hanging fruits, I think. That, I mean, it's just, we say it like it's a small thing, but it's really a big thing. The SIPC pledge, that's really what Title III is out of the Evidence Act. That SIPC pledge updates SIPC and the Evidence Act. And ESRA is the other way that we make pledges to our participants. If we can change those, we could do a lot more with linkages than we're doing now. As you were talking, I'm just remembering, we can't do this because it wasn't in the pledge. We can't do that because if we link them and then try to do something else with the data, we're violating privacy and confidentiality. It's low-hanging fruit, but it could have a lot of impact. So I think we need to find those low-hanging fruit and pick them, David, as fast as we can, so that we can have greater impact, so people can see that we're making progress. And that's going to take some thought. We've got to go through this report as methodically and as thoughtful as the developers of the report put it together.
Great, thank you. And thank you again for your commitment on these issues. We are at time, so I want to thank our panel for being here. Really, this is such important work. I hope is clear and I think signaled by your being here today. We have need for good data and for NCS to play a role on these issues. It's a really ambitious, wide-ranging report with a lot of great information. We look forward to next steps. Thank you for the comments on it, and hopefully everyone here is convinced they should go and read it. So thank you, panel. Thanks all for coming.